So if you have an old double or triple front derailleur on your mountain and road bike and you want to modernize that or convert it to a new one-bike technology, stay tuned. I'll try and go through how to do that. And then also I'll try and put some links in the video. I'm not sure how I do that. This is my first video, but we'll figure that out to where you can buy the components and how you go about getting everything you need to make that conversion. So stay tuned. So I have this higher end Trek Top Fuel 9.8 bike I bought new probably 12 years ago. And it's a 26er. Because of the rear triangle set up in the front fork, I can't update this to a 29er. I really like the frame, I like the suspension, all the components, it's all XT. So I didn't want to sell it on the open market, it wouldn't be worth that much, and I wanted to keep it around for maybe a spare bike. But I did upgrade to a 29 and thought I would convert this from a 3x9, so a 27 speed, to a 1x10 with a little bit higher gearing ratio on the back cassette. And make it a little bit more usable, a little more contemporary. Again, not the ideal setup because it's 26, but it should be a great bike when I'm done. And if I don't end up using it as a backup bike, I'll end up giving it to my grandson, so we'll have a great little setup for him for the next 5 to 10 years. So we'll start with basically disassembling the bike. We'll give it a good cleaning, and then we will talk about some of the tools and components, and we'll start the assembly and conversion. So stay tuned. So as far as tools are concerned, I've broken them down between must-haves, possibly a must-have or nice-to-have, and definitely nice-to-haves over here. So you can buy what you want. I use Spin Doctor and I use Park Tools. I buy some stuff from the local shop. I've got some Shimano specific tools, but really you can go on Amazon, eBay, your local bike store, whatever works for you, whatever, depending on the urgency and how quickly you need the tool. Just pretty much buy whatever works for that component. So I've got the mixture of the Allen wrenches here. I've got the 4, 5, and the 6. I've got the cable cutter for the derailleur cable. I've got the chain tool. If you've got a Masterlink chain, these are a must-have. You can fumble around needle nose pliers, but these work really well. They're very inexpensive and quick and simple to use. Adjustable pliers. I've got the BBT 22. That's for the bottom bracket. It's assembling the race face, which I'm using along with the front crank ring. And then I've got the Shimano rear cassette tool, which also works for SRAM. The torque wrench, of course, with the 3/8 to 1/2 inch adapter. This is the Park Tools. I believe it's a CWP7, and it's really it's a universal crank puller. It works in 2 directions, but for me, the new crank I'm putting on, I will need it if I have to pull the crank apart to adjust or align. I will not need it for pulling out my current Shimano XT crank arm. So that may be something you need, or maybe something you can do without. The universal bearing press tool, which is actually for press-in bearings. I've got the BB90 bottom bracket, so I've got to have that for pressing the new tools in. Or if I want to use a rubber mallet and just be very careful, you can use that as well. Depending on your pedals, you can use the pedal tool. And then this tool is the I'm not sure what the model number is. It's the Park Tools BBT9. I don't use the bottom bracket portion of it down here. I do use this portion here for taking out my current Shimano front crankset. It just is the center tool. You can use, again, a pair of needle nose pliers or other tools, but this one works pretty nice for removing that. So that's the tools as far as they go, and we'll go to the components next. So these are the component groups I selected. A couple of reasons. First of all, Raceface, they have tremendous technical support. You call them up and they will tell you exactly what you need to match your current setup. And for me, it was the 175 crank arms with the 32 tooth front crank ring. And that does match up and align with my BB90 bottom bracket. So that was from Raceface here, along with the necessary washers and adapters and the pedal, I think pedal washers as well. As far as the rear cassette, the derailleur, the shifter, and the chain, that came as one setup from JG Bike. You can also get that from Box Components. Both are great setups. I went with JG Bike. Number one, it was in stock on Amazon, very reasonably priced. I think it was $180 for the whole setup. And you can price those out individually. You could possibly find them a little bit cheaper. I'm not sure about that. I did start to look at things, and it ended up being about the same price to do it individually. But it does include the rear cassette. It includes the derailleur, 10-speed derailleur, along with the 10-speed shifter, which I really like the feature of having the indicator here. And it includes the chain. of course the derailleur cable, and the sheathing for the cable. So everything is there for what you need, and it was reasonably priced. I think the whole setup here was about $320 or so, so not too bad, maybe $330. I also did buy an extra Shimano bottom bracket shield, which is for moisture that gets in the bottom portion of the bottom bracket assembly or any kind of dust. It does seal it out. You may not need this here because, again, depending on how you pull out your bottom bracket, sometimes that's been known to get destroyed, and so I just want to have one on hand just in case. So again, as far as components, I chose the 32 ring front. I currently have a 22, 32, 44. So this matches my middle ring of my current setup. My back ring or cassette setup is 11 to 32. And so I will definitely match the low end as far as as far as speed. I currently would be 32 in the middle and 11 on the back. Now I'll be 32 and 11 again in the back, but I don't have that 44 front ring. So I won't have as much speed, but as far as climbing, I did want to match up and align the 46 on the new rear cassette and the 32 here. The 22 I currently have is definitely smaller in the front, but that combination of 32, 46 will almost one-to-one align with my lowest setting right now of 22 and 32 on the back. So I should have just as good a climbing, not quite as much on the top end, but we spend most of our time in the dirt and up on the hills anyway, so that shouldn't matter. So that's as far as the setup. And again, I don't know if I mentioned this, it's the 10-speed chain with the master link. So all ready to go at $330 or so, and we'll start into the assembly here next. So the tools I'm going to use for disassembly will be the Shimano rear cassette tool, which also works again for SRAM, and that's removing the rear cassette. I'm going to use my cable cutter for removing both the front and rear derailleur cables, my master link, my chain tool for removing the master link and taking the chain off, and of course the BB9 or BBT9 tool from Park Tools. This little center portion here will remove the rear cap off the left crank arm, so then I can pull the crank arm assembly out to the right. So that'll be it for tools. Of course, with some typical Allen wrench. I think I've got 3 and a 4 millimeter Allen wrench I'll need for the derailleurs and pulling them off, and along with the shifters and the grips. Okay, so a few pointers just on taking the bike apart. It's easiest to take the wheels off, get a little bit better access to the handlebars in the back. Also, when you're taking off the left crank, make sure you loosen up the Allen machine screws or bolts before you try and take the end cap off with the Park tool. And that's about it. Oh yes, and the derailleur cables, it's easy just to snap off the end caps and pull them up through the front shifters themselves. So we'll get to it here. Okay, now that we've got everything off, we're going to do a good cleaning of the bike in places you can not typically get to very easily when you're have the wheels and the front crank on and some of the other components. So we'll do a real good cleaning of it. One thing I didn't mention before is when you pull the crank out, make sure and pay attention to the spacers you might have on either side, and then the dust seals, just have the order they go in, because with the race face crank set that I will put back in, I'll use the same spacers on each side, and everything hopefully will line up just right. If I need to get more spacers or remove spacers, I'll have that flexibility as long as I put everything back the way it came when it came off on the XT Dior components. So when I pulled the bottom bracket out, on the left side there was one spacer on the outside of the dust seal, small black spacer there, and on the right side, on the chain ring side, there was a little bit thicker spacer on the outside of the dust seal. So you want to make sure, again, keep those in the positions that you had them when you put the new crank in. And then I also noticed on the left bearing here, there's a little bit of resistance in the bearing itself. So I'm going to go ahead and pull the bearings out, replace them, and start with fresh bearings. So what I'm going to use for pulling these bearings out, and I haven't found an easier way, but 17 millimeter socket goes right through the center of one bearing, and you can feel the inside of the other bearing. Now, one side you'll be able to feel, the other side will be very minimal. You won't be able to feel the side because of that dust seal that's on the inside. So you want to make sure and put it through on the opposite end where you can't feel the edge on with your finger. And then I can just hold, I don't know if you can see it, but I can hold the socket against different parts of the bearing as I tap gently from the other side. Not that it's going to matter because these bearings are ruined anyway, so I want to get some new ones. But I just tap gently, move it around, and keep working my way till the bearing comes out. And out it comes, and there's one bearing. Now this side, I'll be able to pull part of the dust seal out here. And when I do that, I'll be able to get the other bearing out. So stay tuned and we'll get the other bearing out. So after I got the left side bottom bracket bearing out, I could not get the dust seal out. So I ended up using a pair of needle nose pliers and putting it in, expanding it, and then just pulling one half of the axle shield off. And now the other half is exposed. But again, it's still the same diameter. I barely have a little bit of an edge to knock the bearing out. So I had to switch to a screwdriver. And again, you can do it gently if you're going to be replacing or using the bearings. But if not, you can just smack on them. But get it against the edge of the bearing and tap one side. And here's the other side, and out comes the bearing. So that one's good, but I'm going to replace both sets since I'm replacing the one side. And there's the other side of the axle shield. So now that it's all out, I'm going to clear it all out, clean it, degrease it, put the axle shield back in place. And what that does, there's a hole in the bottom of your bottom bracket usually, which allows any kind of moisture that gets in the down tube somehow or the seat post from collecting down below. That hole allows the dirt and water out, but it also allows a place for dirt and water to go in. And this dust shield or axle shield protects the actual spindle of the crank arm from getting wet or rusted or moisture or dirt on it. So like I said, I was able to save this one. I'll be able to reuse it. One goes inside the other like so. And then we'll clean it out, put everything back together, and we'll be ready to go to add the new crank arm. Okay, so I learned something from the local bike store. There's a bottom bracket removal tool for the BB90s, and it looks something like this. I think it's called a BB90.3. If you buy it from Park Tools or one of the other companies. They didn't have it in stock, but I didn't need it anyway because I already got the brackets out, but that would make life a lot easier. Anyway, they did have a new set of bearings. They said the bright bearings, these bearings here are the older style where you have the dust seals on the outside. They come now with the dust seal connected to the bearing with actually a sleeve on the inside that still fits the same axle size. So they had these for 20 bucks. I got lucky on that one as well. So I'm going to start by putting the axle shield back in, and it doesn't have a forward or backward. It can go in either way. So just make sure you line the holes up and you slide one end into the other and compress it all the way in. And now you can go ahead and insert your bearings. And I've got a bearing tool here for putting those in. And basically it just compresses the bearings into the frame itself. And then it stops. So you know the bearings are in there nice and tight, so you can move the tool. And the bearings are seated. So now it's a matter of installing my crank arm and dust seals and spacers, and we'll follow up with that in a moment. Okay, for the next step, we're going to install the bottom bracket crank arm assembly. And if you don't have it, you should get some grease, some bearing grease or assembly grease. This is waterproof White Lightning, and then Slick Mahoney works as well. They're both for bike components, both waterproof. They're both for any kind of turning or spinning or rotating components. So the race face crank assembly I bought actually comes pre-lubricated, and it's got a dust cap here, so for when it comes through the bottom bracket itself, it doesn't collect any dust or debris on it. So we'll leave that on when we assemble it. Insert it, and then for the bottom bracket itself, we're just going to go ahead and put my 32 tooth race face chain ring on the right crank arm. I'm going to hand tighten this just so I don't cross thread it, because they're pretty fine threads. Okay, and once I get down snug, I'll get my torque wrench, and it's set for 30 foot-pounds. So I will I've got my BBT 22, which is the 22 millimeter bottom bracket tool. And so it's right in the assembly here. It's set for 30 foot-pounds. And I'm just gonna go ahead and get some leverage on it here and put it to 30 foot-pounds. There you go. So that's it for the right crank arm. This is the left crank arm. I installed the thicker of the two washers that came off the Shimano Derailleur XT components, and I've got the dust seal in there. I put a little bit of grease in the dust seal just so it holds in place and seals well against the bearing. And now I'll insert very gently through the bottom bracket. I've got this dust seal already in place. I can now remove the dust cap. Again, it's pre-greased, so now I just make sure they're offsetting. And once I get it in place, now it's just a matter of putting on my end cap. If I can find it. Okay, there's the end cap. Oops, I missed a piece here. This is the spacer that goes on the inside of this, and then this is the end cap, and that'll be tightened down to 45 foot-pounds, and then these are the washers for my pedals. So we'll get this all pulled back off, this put back on, and then we'll tighten it down and be ready to go with the rear components. Okay, so now I've got my spacers in place, and got my torque wrench set to 45 foot-pounds. Made a little adapter for the torque wrench so that the 8 millimeter wrench can go on there. And I'll insert it into the center crank and then just turn. And that's already at 45 pounds. Now it's just a matter of installing the pedals. I put some grease on the threads here and added the washers that came with the race face crankset assembly. And then we'll just go ahead and install the pedals. And we're good to go. So in the last section, what I neglected to mention was when you put on the crank arm assembly and you torque it down, make sure that there's no wiggle or play. It's nice and tight and spins freely, of course, but there should be no wiggle or play in that assembly. What I'm going to do next is add all the components back in. I'll give you a couple of pointers here before I get started, and then we'll fast forward through it. But first of all, I'm replacing Derailleur XT with Derailleur. It's basically 105, this component here. I don't have a Shimano or a derailleur hanging tool, which will make sure that everything's level and aligned. But fortunately, because it's Derailleur, and the former set was Derailleur, this derailleur hanging bracket has a little notch here, or actually an ear, and then on the derailleur itself, like the XT, has an ear here as well. So when I hang this, I cinch it down to the same ear on the derailleur bracket, and I know it's going to be level and ready to go. So I don't need the tool for this, but in some cases you might need to have that tool, which gives everything again level. Also, when you put the front components on, as far as the handlebars, it's going to be the shifter assembly first on the right side, then the brake, and then my shock lockout. and then the hand grip. And on the left side, it's going to be the brake assembly, then my bell, which I have for my bike, and then the handlebar grip. What I do is I put everything on there loosely. I put the grips on, tighten them down, and then I cinch everything up to it, make sure everything has free movement, and then tighten it down. Then I'll route through the cables back to the rear derailleur, and then we'll get into some adjustments on the rear derailleur. So the next step in the process is to take your old rear derailleur cable assembly and cut your new housings to match the housings that are on the existing cable. So in my case, I'm externally routed cable, so I've got 3 of the housings, and I've already done that. I've already cut those. I use my Park Tools cable cutter, and then I use a small screwdriver to just basically remount the holes on the inside of the housing so that the cable passes through it nice and easily. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and route these cables now, and be ready to connect to the rear derailleur and move on to adjustments. Okay, so the cable's all routed through. I connected to the rear derailleur. Everything's ready to go. I would suggest leaving this long until you're ready for your final adjustments. And the next step is going to be to remove the current cassette from my my wheels with the Spin Doctor Shimano cassette removal tool, which just gets in and put a torque wrench on. We hold this with a chain whip, and then we remove this and put the new one on, which is going to be the 1146 from Race Face. I'm not going to go into how to size a chain for a full suspension. Plenty of videos on the internet on how to do that, but basically you take out the top or bottom pin on the rear shock, you raise it to its highest position or most compression, and that shortens the distance of the chain. So you know you're at the shortest position, and then you size your chain correctly. So when you actually bring it back down and you're not in compression, you're actually having no slop in your chain in your smallest ring, and in the highest ring, you're not stretched too much on your rear derailleur, too far forward. So that's how you, I mean, again, Google that on how to, or YouTube it on how to size the chain, but I'm gonna go ahead and get everything cut, get the chain cut, get it sized, and then we'll get back on the how to do the adjustments on the rear derailleur. Okay, so the final setup is adjusting the rear derailleur. I've got the chain installed, and in the smallest ring on the cassette, it's not tight, but it's taut, so there's no slop in it. I've put my derailleur cable through, and what I've done on the smallest ring, it's important just to pull it tight, again taut, but not too much tension in it, and tighten the screw down, and make sure that your derailleur shifter, you've turned the screw all the way in so that you have plenty of adjustment to tighten the cable up as it stretches, and if you don't have enough tension initially. So right now the cable is taut. I can feel it here, and I can feel it here. I'm good to go. Now it's adjusting the limit screws. So first of all, there's 3 screws here. You've got the upper limit screw here, you've got the lower limit screw here, and you've got the B screw here. The B screw, when I'm in my biggest ring here, I adjust the B screw so that the distance between my pulley wheel and the bottom of my biggest ring is about 8 to 9 millimeters, because I've got a 46, so it's about 1/3 of an inch. So once I'm in the top ring, I've got that upper limit set screw set, I will adjust the B screw and make sure that that gap is correct. Never should have to adjust that one again. It's important with the upper limit screw here that you don't have the derailleur pushing too far, otherwise you'll overshift and you end up with your chain going into your spokes, and you could get stuck in there. And if you have the lower limit set screw here too loose, it can come over this way too far, and your chain could come off your bottom ring and end up in your back triangle area here and damage your frame. So the goal is to have the upper limit screw here, have the guide wheel pulleys in perfect alignment up and down with the top ring of the cassette, and on the lower limit screw here, that the pulley rings, again, the pulley guide wheels are in perfect alignment with the lowest ring here. And I've already tried shifting. It's far off. I cannot stay in the lowest ring. I can't get to the upper ring. So I just have to adjust those limit screws, then I'll adjust my B screw, and then we should be done. So let me get at that. We'll see how it works. Okay, so I've made my final adjustments, and when I was making the adjustments, I found out that I had a little bit too much tension on my derailleur cable because it was jumping up more than one position at a time, so my indexing wasn't quite right. So I had to loosen it a little bit here, and now I've got a little bit more slack in it, and I've got the ability to, again, tighten it as it stretches. But if you find that when you're shifting, you're going up more than one ring, it's not indexed correctly, you might not have enough tension here. I've got my lower limit set, I've got my upper limit set, I've got my B switch screw set, and now the indexing looks really good. So we're gonna go through the gears, one shift, one click. And make sure you make it all the way up to your upper ring easily, which I do. And then coming down one at a time. And we are good, ready to get it out on the trail. At this point, I'll cut off my cable and cap it, and we'll give it a run up on the hills.